Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome viewers to another episode of Pathways to Prosperity. Tonight we delve into the world of entrepreneurship, and many people have said that small and medium-sized enterprises are the backbone or the lifeblood to any economy. But these entrepreneurs face significant challenge from a financial perspective at startup through the different phases of their businesses as they grow. And tonight we're speaking to one such entrepreneur, Ms. Thembisile. And when I read her CV, one of the call-outs in her CV was the artist in a lab coat. She's from Alta.Africa, a boutique pharmaceutical and cosmetic chemical firm. And we're going to chat to her about the different challenges that she faced through her journey as an entrepreneur within a very interesting sector of the economy. Thembisile, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Tell me, I must ask, how did you get involved in pharmaceutical and cosmetic ingredients?
Well, background, I did analytical chemistry in university. I was in the lab for a short stint before realizing I love humans and need to jump out. But my first exposure into chemicals and their application was when I worked for a personal care manufacturing company locally called Amka, and from there I was just obsessed, like all these ingredients and the application that go into. I soon found that I have a flair for marketing and just people conversations. I jumped into the chemical distribution side in 2006, and ever since I've been basically in the background.
And tell me, what does Alta do today?
Alta is a curator of fine chemical ingredients for the personal care, wellness, and pharmaceutical industry. And we curate various ingredients to ensure sustainable manufacturing of various applications and products.
Across the spectrum, so herbal, pharmaceutical, allopathic?
Correct. Because we have a huge passion for natural ingredients, but being a scientist, we understand there's a beautiful balance that you can have between your scientific and your natural type of ingredients. And so we are across the spectrum. The only thing that we really are strict on is to ensure that it's SDG aligned procurement, making sure that it's aligned with our value system of SDG 2030.
Okay, lovely. Now, obviously, coming from a financial background and the show rooted in trying to give as good and sound financial advice to our viewers, and in this instance, the budding entrepreneur, as an entrepreneur that had a stable job, you had a fixed income, you now took that leap to go and open up your own business. And I'm sure that would have come with significant financial challenges at the get-go. So what were some of the biggest financial challenges that you as an entrepreneur would have faced when setting up your new business?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, trying to get someone to believe in your dream, which you have so strongly in your mind, but to actually communicate it in such a way that it made business sense. And also just the challenge of not having the network. Me personally, I didn't have direct access. I couldn't really access, finance from banks due to my credit profile. And so I had to be resourceful in terms of how I actually tap into funding to start the business.
And how, if you don't mind, how did you go about doing that?
Well, it was a whole lot of shimmy shammy and making sure that you communicate with network and people that believe in you. At the time, it was actually my ex-CEO who loved the vision that I had and was able to give me a little bit of startup money to just get me going, boosted my confidence.
As a loan or grant or equity?
As a grant, as a small little grant. They had a leftover budget for the year and he said, listen, I believe in what you do, so go for it. And the rest was literally my savings, coming from corporate and using every single drop.
So a proper hustle of an entrepreneur, trying to find somebody to give you some startup capital and personal savings. And I think experientially as a banker, what we've seen in many entrepreneurs, that story of startup is almost identical to as you've described. Is they would take their personal savings and invest it, and then hustle to find an angel investor, find some grant money, or go to the Department of Trade and Industry, or those type of environments. Okay, so how many years has the journey been? What has it been like? Some highs, some lows. Give us some of the highlights of the journey thus far.
Well, look, the massive highlights was actually talking to some industry people who actually said, okay, yes, we're willing to stand behind you. One of those highlights was actually signing on board your principals, right? The people who are actually willing to supply you product and give you really, really good terms. So that was really just a boost that someone, okay, actually trusts you to actually give you favorable payment terms, which is not something that was quite easy. And that has helped at least to begin the journey and make it a little bit easier. I mean, another is just a highlight in terms of reaching out to an old network and someone saying, okay, I also believe, let me invest in the business, keep you going. And typical of a scientist, invested it in research. That's the thing about being in a lab coat. You tend to be so dedicated to the data because you want quality products for the people that you serve. So those have been the highlights. Those are the things that have really pushed me on.
And some of the lows?
Some of the lows, oh man, losing that contract, having that big pipeline that almost will get you over the cliff, but it just falls apart because look, there's a strong competition out there, bigger sharks, right? And being a small startup and being almost like a one-man person, it does take a knock to the confidence, but you just keep on going.
And at this stage of the business now, you've passed the startup phase, you've got some clients on your book, you've got contracts in place with your suppliers. What are some of the main challenges that you face now as a functioning, operating business?
Scalability, right? Okay. So now when you realize that you actually need the manpower, you need proper professionals to take it to the next step. And how do you finance that? How do you balance that? That is probably that's the big challenge right now.
So as a banker, if I were to ask you, what are the big expectations that entrepreneurs like you have from us as a bank? What do you find are the missing pieces between our two universes?
Man, I think one thing, it would be great to have a proper conversation with a banker who at least understands where you're really coming from. Like, take it back, okay? So I don't have the big CFO who's sitting at the back office making sure they do all those proper things. Those things are very important. I've seen the benefit in making sure that you're organized. However, having banks to actually step back a bit and say, okay, how do we stop having a big blanket approach to how we approach finance and actually scale it so that it's at the level of where the entrepreneur is at the time?
So you're saying we don't understand you guys as entrepreneurs. Is that what you're saying?
It feels like it because the demands are reasonable. And I say reasonable because I do come from a corporate world. So I understand where the dynamics come from and I understand the risk management that bankers really have to face, right? However, it's a case of if I didn't have that exposure, I've seen it many times where the conversation, the language, the ROIs, the ratios of calculating whether, this is actually going to be a great forecast, in the next 5 years or so. Those are some of the things that are not easily just readily available to understand. It takes time and it takes a little bit of luck in case of networking, but it would be nice to have just those conversations where people can really scale it down to the level that you're at. Okay,
so we need to do some work on being more relevant to you guys as entrepreneurs and not having this blanket approach. Taken, let's see what we have as a conversation inside of the bank. Maybe one or two last questions. Thanks for the time. It's been interesting chatting to you. What we see as some of the key attributes of entrepreneurs is one of the things we notice is they don't like to save. We try and encourage personals. We had a whole discussion. We will be having discussions around personal savings, etc. But as an entrepreneur, trying to understand the mindset. Why is it that entrepreneurs, in your opinion, don't like to save?
Well, let me take it back to a point where, like I said, the contract doesn't come through, the pipeline doesn't happen. And I've actually explained it to one of my ex-colleagues as well. It's like you're in survival mode. Right? You're still human, you have fears, you have responsibilities, and at the time people are like, spend money to make money. And
Yeah,
you kind of go into that panic mode of, maybe if I spend a little bit more here, if I just do this, it'll happen. So saving becomes almost at the back of your mind, because you're just trying to survive for the night or survive for the year or whatever it is. And I know that I have personally struggled with that within my entrepreneurship role, because prior to in the corporate, it's quite okay. You can start drafting your budget, you can start drafting in such a way that you save. But when the business is here and that is your life source, those decisions are really tough. You end up going, okay, maybe just spend and risk here, you know, instead of just saving. I want to save, but I want to keep this alive. And I think that's where education plays a role, right? I think that's where the strong relationships with your financial advisor or your bank, that's where you can have conversation to say, okay, we understand this, but take it a little bit differently and a step back to see in future. So that is my personal experience as an entrepreneur.
So would you say that coming from a corporate background and now getting into entrepreneurship and running your own business from scratch, has there been a change in how you perceive the world from a risk perspective? Would you say you were originally extremely risk averse and now you a risk taker, or somewhere in between?
Yes, I mean the change has been has been astronomical. But I think what entrepreneurship does, it makes you more aware of who you are and really the core of how you make your decisions. I think from a corporate point of view, it was safe. There was no risk. There was no, sharp thinking of having to think, okay, do I do this or do I do that? In terms of entrepreneurship, it's always risk. So you're always constantly taking risk. I've become more of a risk taker in that I seize opportunity, which sometimes doesn't make sense, but it sometimes works out so beautifully. So much more of a risk taker, but financially I have learned through the burn that, okay, when you do actually get in that money, be a little bit more wise, manage your cash flow a little bit better, plan a little bit better. Just look at it a little bit far back instead of just jumping in.
Okay, any regrets?
Regrets?
Things you would have done differently. Would you go back to corporate?
Many a times I have sent through my CV application. I will not lie, right? Many times I've gone like, okay, you know what, send in the CV, this is not it. Actively want to jump back? Not really, because it's been so rewarding. In terms of regrets, I think a little bit better in terms of communicating and building those relationships a little bit better and finer. I think that is some of the things that you look back at, but it's things that you learn from. So it's not quite regrets. It's more like, okay, things that you tick off to say, okay, maybe I can do a little bit better next time.
Thembisile, thanks so much. Parting advice, parting words to fellow entrepreneurs across the country.
Okay, it's challenging.
Yeah.
It will not be easy. Sometimes you'll have to be your own, cheerleader at times. It can be lonely, but I promise you, it is worth it. It is a journey that takes you way beyond the shores. It is something that is rewarding in more ways than one. And if you really have the heart for it and you really believe in yourself and you have your higher power with you, then go for it.
Thembisile, thanks so much. And viewers, to those budding entrepreneurs, I hope that this story reminds you that you're not alone. The challenges that you face as a new business, as an upcoming business, trying to land a contract, trying to negotiate terms with your supplier, managing your cash flow, fighting with the bank because the bank doesn't understand you, trying to get finances. All of these stories are key characteristics of your archetype, the entrepreneur. But if we don't have you guys in our country, we would lose the lifeblood of our country. So keep at it, grow your businesses, and help us grow this beautiful country of ours and its economy. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.